Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Usual Places. This is a podcast focusing on the original Xbox 360, Xbox One, and related communities. I'm your host, Scotch. We also got a couple other people on the call here that we'll introduce in just a moment. It's been a while since we've been with you all. I think our last episode released back in August, so if you're listening to this now in about November, late 2024, um, we had some complications come up with the editing of that last episode, so hopefully we're going to be in a better routine. I'll just take the blame on that. That was kind of on me for taking so long to edit it. It kind of went crazy with the cleaning it up and stuff, and our conversation with Marco ended up going on for about 3 hours in total, but I was somehow able to edit it down to our usual runtime of about an hour 45 without really getting rid of anything too important. Other than that, we're going to jump into this episode. So today we have a couple awesome guests on. We have Prehistoric Man, who is infamous for his work on the RAM modifications for the original Xbox console. We also have Mr. Mario joining us, who will be talking about his work on creating videos and tutorials for a variety of different consoles, from original Xbox to PlayStation 4 and beyond. So we look forward to speaking with them and picking their brains about the projects they've been working on and their experience with the modding scene. To start things out, we're going to start talking about the Modfest coming up. This is a new competition that's going to be spurring some hopefully creative new projects in the scene. Haguero, can you take it off and tell us about that?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. Thanks to everyone that joined in today. Pretty much the Xbox scene community is thrilled to present the Modfest, and it's pretty much a development event dedicated to the original Xbox, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Series X, and pretty much it's an open invitation to developers, artists, and enthusiasts to create and submit games, emulators, applications, or even hardware mods. So we're opening submissions on the 1st of December, and we've set a due date for the projects to be submitted by the 31st of January. We will have a community voting panel and judging panel, and we'll be awarding essentially prizes to the top entries across the two categories, which we've decided will be a software-based category and a hardware-based category. Um, Projects can use any form of official or unofficial development kits or software. But there is one catch to that, and we're asking for these projects to be open sourced and published on us, like say on your GitHub or a similar platform. And that's just to allow other people or in the community to sort of contribute to these projects as well. So we've got a list of all the rules and everything related to this competition online. And you can view them either by going to the xboxscene.info website or by joining the Xbox Scene Discord.
Yep, very cool. So if you're a hardware or software developer, check out xbox-scene.info for more information. You can submit your project and hopefully win a prize. And if not, at least give back to the community. The next topic I wanted to bring up, there is a cool new website that was recently released by Grapes, I believe his screen name is, and that is xboxrev.com. That's xbrev.com. And this is a tool that allows you to type in your Xbox's serial number and figure out its revision or its motherboard revision. A very common question we get on Reddit and in the Xbox Team Discord is, what revision is my console? And they'll take a picture of it. So with this tool, xboxrev.com, you can type in your console serial number, or if you're on mobile or even on desktop, you can upload a picture or take a picture of your console's barcode of the serial number printed on the bottom, and it'll tell you its most likely revision number. So that can be helpful for figuring out what kind of console you have, and then go on to do whatever mods you need to do for it. The next piece of Xbox news is that there's been a new version of Cerbios that's come out. So version 2.4.2 has a couple features related to video output, including improving support for VGA, which I think is still a feature that's being improved upon. Also improvements to Force 480p. But most interesting feature that comes out with this version is proper dual hard drive support. So this basically means that Cerbios users can replace their DVD drive with a second mechanical or solid state drive. So it basically goes in place of your DVD drive in that same IDE connector. It can be a brand new drive that's formatted with up to 16 terabytes. So in theory, you could have two 16 terabyte drives in your original Xbox console, which is insane. This also makes for a makeshift optical drive emulator, if you want to call it that, although it's technically not. I myself have been doing some testing where I've used an SD card in place of the DVD drive, and it's really easy to just throw ISOs onto an SD card, pop it into your Xbox, and then they load, and you can play them as per usual. And then, of course, you also get the speed benefits of no latency or barely any latency seek times as you would with a normal SSD. So it's a very cool feature. It's still rather new. It requires the Xbox executables to be updated in order to support this. And currently there is only two dashboards that support this, and that is Lithium X as well as UIX Lite. So if you're running either of those dashboards, you can take advantage of dual hard drive support. And next up, there's also some news related to PrometheOS. Can you tell us about that, Hag?
Yeah, sure. So there was an update made to PrometheOS version 1.40. And in that update, we added support to the 2 megabyte Aladdin variant chips. And also, it was the first step into introducing support into the Modxo. So we officially supported the official Pico, the RP2040 and the YD RP2040 variants. It also added support to hide the splash screen via the settings menu, which was a requested feature. It's got the functionality that was added by Team Cerbios, so the dual hard drive can be configured via the settings. We added a Space Invaders minigame just for you, Scotch.
Thank you.
There was some issues with, not a problem, there was issues with some slowdowns and compatibility issues on certain Xbox revisions. That looks like that was ironed out as well. And also, we just made some tweaks into the settings menu so you could adjust the date and time. And EQ was working on a RTC add-on module. So essentially, what this module does is it connects to the LPC header. And for those people that remove the clock cap, you can install this RTC module in there and set the time. And essentially, if you do unplug the box from the power, it still retains the time. It's got about a 2032 cell battery that powers the unit, so which is a pretty cool add-on, and that can be configured via the settings menu as well through Prometheus. If you're not running Prometheus OS, then I believe there is a software that you can run on your Xbox and configure the module itself. Unfortunately, this only works if you are running Cerbios as your BIOS.
Other than that, I know that Modxo recently had its version 1.0 release, which is a very cool project, and that is related to the RP2040 chip that Hag was talking about. So this is a very, for anyone who is not familiar, the Modxo is basically you can take a RP2040 chip, which are very inexpensive mod chips, and it can act as a mod chip for the original Xbox. So this is using basically off-the-shelf parts. You just have to wire up some simple components to your LPC, and then the RP2040 chip acts as a mod chip. So you don't need to go have a custom board printed. You don't need to necessarily find a custom board manufacturer or someone in the community who makes these, although there will be projects, and there are projects, as we'll go into, that make a custom carrier board for the RP2040 and even add additional features to it. But anyway, so Modxo 1.0 was recently released, and can we hear a little bit from you, EqUiNoX, about what that entails?
Yeah, hi. So yeah, Modxo version 1 was released. It has the support for all revision Xboxes. It has Super IO support. I'm trying to think what else it has. um,
The RGB support was added in there.
yes, and I think some basic LCD support. Shellax was brought on to Team Resurgent, and we've been working with him to bring all the latest features into Modxo and going forwards.
Touch basis up on that as well. I believe there was while we added support for the official Pico in the mod show, and obviously the RP2040, the market is flooded with clones as well. So Shalax was working on a fix for that. So while we do recommend you use the official hardware, if you do happen to purchase something that there is a clone, while we might not guarantee 100% compatibility with it, there was an update as well pushed to the 1.0 branch that improves the compatibility for these chips.
Other than that, there's also been some news in the Xbox 360 scene related to hard drives and SSDs. I know Skye and Eaton have been working on supporting additional drives. Can you tell us a bit about that, Skye?
So, somewhat recently, the developer of Fat Explorer, Eaton, has been working on some things. He's been posting about it predominantly on like his Twitter, as well as there have been some posts that happened on the Xbox Scene Discord, if I'm not mistaken. But Eaton is currently in the process of trying to add support for solid state drives in terms of Xbox 360s. For those who don't know, there are some limitations when it comes to adding a hard drive of any kind onto an Xbox 360. And solid state drives are not natively supported in any way, shape, or form unless you have your console hard modded in some way, shape, or form, RGH, JTAG, however it is. But specifically for solid states, the primary reason why you can't do that is because they can't really be like modified in the same way that a hard drive can, because there's the old tool like HDD Hacker, and recently Eaton added support for newer Western drives to be able to to inject like the security sector in order to make them function. But we were never able to do anything like that with solid states. Well, he's currently going through the process to actually add support for that. I want to say that I've helped, and I kind of more just like got the ball rolling, so to speak. I posted like a proof of concept on Twitter a few months ago using like equipment that I have at work, which nobody else can really gain access to, not unless you want to spend like $20,000 on a piece of hardware that you'll never use and a license for that as well. But specifically for this, it does still carry some limitations. For this, there's still the 500 gigabyte limit, which is just a hard limit imposed on the fact that the security sector still can't be modified because there still hasn't been cracked open yet. And as of right now, there are only a few solid state controllers and like specific drives that are known to be specifically supported for this. Notably, the newer Phison family chipset. I think they have it listed as like S11, but the actual controller is the PS3111. That specifically, there's the Inland Professional solid state, which I believe you can still just buy those outright. And one other one that's currently supported is the Maxio. It's the MAS 1102. And that one specifically, there's the Lexar NS100. That solid state is currently supported as well. None of these tools are currently out, just so you are aware. Everything is still a work in progress. Right now, it's trying to get more support for like other Phison chipsets along with some other Maxio chipsets. We're going through the process to try and figure out like what drives can you buy that still have these. Are they still like brand new? There's lists floating around, but there's still margin for error, unfortunately, because a manufacturer can basically just throw in whatever chipset they want. Unfortunately, on these solid states, like say for instance, you buy like a Kingston A400. If you get like a lower end, that might have a Phison, but as soon as you start getting towards the middle to higher end ones, then it might switch over to say a Silicon Motion chipset, which those have not been quite cracked just yet. Those ones in particular are unfortunately a bit of a pain for more reasons than one. One specifically is the fact that in order to actually modify the firmware on those, you need to have a loader that is specific to the NAND chips, not even the controller. So fun times ahead for that one.
So just to kind of clarify, so you said this would allow someone to to buy an SSD off the shelf more or less, or on Amazon, whatever the case, a new SSD, as long as it's under 512 gigabytes, they can hook it up to Fat Explorer and format it to work in an Xbox 360 console that's unmodified, just completely stock.
Yeah, that is the idea. That 500 gigabyte limitation, by the way, is only in a sense that the Xbox will only ever be able to see 500 gigs on an unmodified console. You can still technically use a 1 terabyte so long as it's supported by both Fat Explorer and the controller itself is working. It's just that you're going to be missing out on 500 whole gigs then. So you may as well just save your money and get yourself the 500 gig model if that's the case.
Very cool. Yeah, that's remarkable to do on an unmodified console. That's very cool.
And touching back on Eaton specifically, the page is kind of buried on his site, but he's currently trying to get people to give him information about the solid states that they have, whether it's installed, if they have them brand new, and he even has a utility that you can run on your computer, one that he developed specifically, that will just output some text out to a log, and you just either send it to him, put it up on, I want to say you can put it up on the comments on his actual website for that. And I think that's probably the best way to get in contact, because he specifically is trying to find specific solid states that can be supported, along with trying to isolate what like the best controllers are, because right now there's 2 that are good and working, but he's trying to expand out the scope of support for more MaxCO and more Phison controllers, because those 2 specifically are, I'm not going to say easy to work with, but they are the easier ones to work with.
If people want to stay up to date as soon when this project is done and released, Eaton, I imagine, will be publishing a post on his website, and that's at fatexplorer.eaton-works.com. You can also follow Eaton on Twitter by following at XEEaton. So Skye, I wanted to ask, so related to that topic, so that means that basically brand new hard drives coming off the shelves are going to be usable on retail consoles. And it sounds like this also is kind of a way to make it so that you can continue buying hard drives off the shelf moving into the future, right?
Ideally, yes. So when it comes to using like a brand new drive inside of an unmodified console, unfortunately that will not work due to some unfortunate safeguards that the hard drive manufacturers are putting into the firmware. Specifically, they're locking things down at like the ROM level, so it requires physical intervention, which isn't really feasible for your average person who just wants to jump into putting like a new drive inside of their console. So unfortunately, due to that, we're currently kind of facing like a dwindling supply problem. So going forward, you can really only use like for instance, a Western Digital hard drive that's that was manufactured prior to, we'll just say 2019 or so. That's really the only realistic way that you're going to be able to put in like a normal hard drive into an unmodified 360, because those are the ones that the vendor commands have been released for, and they are supported specifically on Fat Explorer for its sort of like 360 hard drive maker function. So unfortunately, we are not going to be able to use anything that's brand new out of the box. So I'm hoping that going forward, we can use this as sort of like a stopgap solution so that we can actually be able to use brand new hardware inside of these unmodified 360s. So we're having to use solid states, which is interesting to think about, because we're going from not having like any realistic ability to use solid states to basically having them be the stepping stone for making sure that we have working consoles going forward, until such time as anything changes with anything else in the hard drive scene that'll let us use new off-the-shelf parts in unmodified consoles.
So it's kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. That's tremendous.
That's the hope going forward.
Okay, well, I appreciate you giving us some insight into that. So moving forward onto our next topic, so we also have Harcroft on the call, who has been busy behind the scenes working on a couple interesting projects. One that I wanted to have you touch on, if you're open to it, Harcroft, is your TraceFix board. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. This is an idea that a friend of ours, Sikta, had maybe 6 months ago, and I pawned it off to several other PCB designers because I didn't want to do it. And no one else seemed to want to either. And someone on the Xbox Homebrew Discord was having just a nightmare of a time repairing the front panel traces on their motherboard. And I'm like, I guess it's time. So I went and started developing two different pairs of simple circuit boards that will run a flex cable between them to lower the barrier of entry, to lower the difficulty of the repair for the front panel traces for the more average or new user who's new user with a soldering iron. And the idea is to keep the cost low, to make the soldering as easy as possible and make everything just kind of fit, like drop in, fit as easily as possible. I've designed 4 boards for that so far because 1.0 and 1.1 motherboards have one physical layout for things, and then 1.2 to 1.6 have a different layout. So essentially, you have to kind of pick and choose which board version you want to match up with your trace fix boards. Really not much else to say. I'm on the second revision of prototypes. I think there's going to be one more revision and then we'll be done. One thing I'm hoping to do is I can fit those 4 boards and possibly one other interesting board in this on a circuit board the size of a business card. So you could literally just send out a business card with 2 sets of trace fix boards on it.
For listeners who aren't familiar with the kind of trace issue that we're referring to, can you let them know about what this fix accomplishes?
So one rule of PCB design, going back to the kind of the origin of even like making PCBs by hand, is you don't lay very narrow traces or in general traces on the edge of a PCB because they're more prone to breakage. But on the Xbox, it's actually even worse because you have 4 very tiny traces, like 0.2 or 0.15 millimeter thick traces within about 3 millimeters of the edge of a PCB. So that means any kind of physical nick or damage will damage those traces, but also just humidity ingress, like water getting into the board, and those traces can rot themselves out without any intervention, without any spillage, without anything else. They'll just, from humidity in the air, they will start to rot out. It's also in an area near the clock capacitor. So if the clock capacitor leaks, there's a chance it can leak toward those traces and rot them out. So for someone who's new at soldering, you got to think like 2 or 3 millimeters with 0.2 millimeter traces or smaller. It's very difficult to solder something that small. So the idea is you just drop these boards on and you're bypassing the traces entirely. You're just soldering to test points. Except for the red LED. The red LED, you're gonna it's a little more difficult because there is no like easy to use test point. I've kind of worked around that the best I can, and we'll have documentation on how to work around that.
And so these traces are, in particular, they carry the signals to the power button for the front LED, the LED and the power switch, right?
Correct. The power, eject, red and green signals. And so when you plug in a console and it just turns on automatically, or the DVD drive ejects automatically, that's a symptom of those traces being broken, either rotting away or being cut in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So originally, I had named these at Sikta's idea. It was his idea, so I could let him name it. And originally, the name was Janus, as in the two-faced god. But literally every person we told that to said they would just scratch off the J, so I had to scrap that idea. And now they're called Hugin and Munin.
Well, very cool. Yeah, that's a very common problem we see newcomers asking about all the time. And with them being newcomers, it's definitely going to help make repairing their console a lot easier. So that's going to be very cool once it comes out.
There is one more board to go along with them, though. And, essentially, about as long as Sikta has been asking me about this board, EqUiNoX has been asking me for a simple, easy, quick, whatever, D0 board that you could protect yourself from ripping off your D0 on the bottom of the motherboard, D0 test point, which is the test point you need to essentially enable a mod chip. You're disabling the onboard flash. So I threw together a tiny little board we're calling the D0 Devil 2 or D0 Devil Squared, because there's already a separate D0 Devil board. It's going to cost a few cents. I'm going to produce several hundred and just give them away and get them out there in the world, give the Gerbers away, just like these other TraceFix boards will also be open source. And I'd like to get that little tiny board onto the same little business card size PCB if we end up doing that. There's 3 ways you can use that board. You could just solder it down and short out the ground point to your D0 to just enable your mod chip. You can solder it and then run a wire like you would to a Xenium to let the Xenium control your D0, or you can use a tiny JST connector that goes out to what the Modxo uses and what the old Xeniums use is JST SH 1.0 millimeter.
Well, very cool. Looking forward to that project coming out. I'm sure that'll be helpful for newcomers and even lazy people like myself. So I appreciate you putting in that effort. You got I know you've also been working on trying to get USB drives and adapters out to people for XCAT, right?
It wasn't really my project, but I'm certainly hopping on it. Xbox 7887 wanted to jump into that more. He quickly designed a PCB to connect, I think, a controller port, like the old Xenium USB adapters, just any cheap generic USB adapter to use a known working USB drive for Xbox. And I'm going to be building a menu for that just so we have quick and easy access to something like XCAT, possibly the DLC signer, FTP server, Insignia Setup Assistant, and Rocky Hive soft mod. And the goal isn't to sell these to make a profit, it's to get these out to as many people as possible for free or as cheap as possible, maybe just for the cost of shipping or whatever. To just kind of flood the market with these so everyone has access to these cheaply or freely. That will hopefully get more people able to soft mod or back up their EPROMs or running XCAT, just whatever we can do to help get more people in. And especially with Japan, there's a huge barrier to entry of this whole modding thing in Japan. Is a stigma against it. But as we all know, you have to kind of protect your hardware from failure by backing up your EPROM, because at the very least, you're going to have to build the new hardware up at some point.
You guys have also had some recent new findings that people have been submitting by running XCAT on their consoles and finding some lost DLC and title updates, right?
Yes, I've got a list here of the things we found since roughly August. October 15th, we have a title update for a game called Juiced, which is the only update for it. I got that out to the Insignia team, and that game was added to Insignia the next day, and that title update is now available on Insignia. Rocky, anything I have here is also available on Rocky 5's downloader. At the same time, an older MechAssault 1 title update was found. World Poker Tour title update was found, fixes a few problems. Libby has been working on that for Insignia. I don't know the details on what's going on now. That's it for updates for that time period. But then we have NBA 2K6 roster DLCs, all the rest of the DLC for Karaoke Revolution, and then 3 more DLCs for Karaoke Revolution Party. Going forward to October 24th, we had the last of the updates and DLC for NBA 2K6. That game's completely archived now. That's found. October 27th was a kind of a special one. There's a game called Stacked with Daniel Negru. He's a famous poker player. Essentially, the game is unplayable on Xbox Live without at least one title update. It looks like we found the last title update for that game. And it just so happened a friend of mine had bought a console out of this bargain bin with like a shattered lid. It was just a destroyed console. He wanted to turn it into a debug kit. And $10 on a console, brought it home, and he goes, "Hey, I should run XCAT before I finish modding it and all that." He runs XCAT, and we find this stacked title update that we were so desperate for the last few years.
Oh,
That
nice.
hopefully will be able to be added to Insignia soon.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations to you and Crunch and the rest of the XCAT team there. That's really cool. And for any listeners who were
I'm really happy to have that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And for any listeners who are kind of lost on this topic, we did talk about XCAT more extensively in earlier episodes. I want to say in 2, maybe 1, but just as a reminder, if you have an original Xbox console, even if it's stock, if it's just sitting around in your closet, please pull that out, hook it up to a TV, and try to run XCAT on it. There is an ongoing community effort to archive and back up lost DLC and title updates that were available through Xbox Live, but of course, Xbox Live servers have since shut down. So if you have one of those files lingering on your console, like these recent updates that they've been collecting, your contribution could help maintain the could help preserve these titles so that people can enjoy them for years to come. So if you haven't run that yet on your console, definitely look into running that. You can find more information on consolemods.org/XCAT.
Thanks. We have one more, which was just a few days ago on November 22nd. We have an older NTSC update for Lynx 2004. There's still some PAL and Japanese or Asia region updates missing for that game, but that is all of the NTSC North American updates found for that title.
And outstanding. Well, it's cool to see that it's working. It wasn't just a theory, like people are actually using it, and you guys are actually finding lost content and actually helping preserve these titles. So that's awesome.
So with the addition of VGA mode or VGA support in Cerbios, I'd been asking that for over a year them, and then since they finally added it, I figured I should, give back and do something to support that. So I created a board, an external board that looks a little bit like the Chimeric HDMI, little pigtail and everything. It has VGA support, SPDIF audio, and analog audio. That's just to get VGA out of your Xbox with the best quality possible, because it has a video amp and a sync splitter in it. A friend, or a customer, I guess, requested having SCART support or RGBS support. So I've recently added RGBS support to Lilypad VGA. So I'll be able to use a DB15 or D sub connector to your BNC connectors to get VGA mode, or in this case, SCART mode on your old PVM. And as for OXHD, I'm still working on it. It's coming along slowly. Have some testers looking at boards right now, and hopefully we'll have an update for you guys soon.
Well, very cool, Harcroft. We appreciate you telling us all about the details for your projects you've been working on, and to everyone else on this call who's been telling us about the news going on in the scene. So with that, we welcome our first guest. Today we have a guest on who's done some unique and impressive work with Xbox hardware mods. He's managed to push the Xbox's capabilities with projects like the 256 megabyte RAM upgrade, and he's also found a way to upgrade version 1.6 Xbox motherboards to 128 megabytes. A unique challenge that requires some creative solutions. His work has opened up new possibilities for Xbox fans and modders alike. Prehistoricman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scotch.
Yeah, and thank you. So we got a couple questions I wanted to tackle with you. If we can kind of pick your brain a little bit about these projects you've been working on. Could you share with us a bit about how you got started in Xbox hardware modding in general? Like, was there a specific project or a moment that pulled you into this world initially?
Yeah, so it goes way back. When I was a kid, my dad got me an Xbox, and great coincidence, it happened to be modded, as many Xboxes were, and it had one of the best chips, right? Had the Executor X3. And as a kid, of course, I had no idea what that meant. It just meant the colors were a bit funny, and I could play all the games that had the dodgy logos and the dodgy papers. And then, yeah, as a kid, I was thinking, can I make my Xbox more cool? And I started getting interested in stuff like adding LEDs. I just hot glued some LEDs in. That was very cool. I got the Xbox Media Center. I found that really cool. It was one of the first things I released was a skin for XBMC.
What?
Just not a whole skin, just a little modification.
Oh, I was going to ask, did you release like a Confluence or something like that? Yeah, cool, man. Yeah, the draw for when you see an Xbox as a kid turn on for the first time and do something it wasn't designed to do, I feel like that's just a little bit of magic, Like you're like,
oh yeah,
"What?"
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like, in general, making devices do things that they shouldn't do. For example, I'm sure you've just talked about this, the Doom BIOS. That's cool. I like running Doom on everything.
Now we can run Doom on our BIOSes without even having like a proper environment.
I was gonna say I feel like because I mean Doom running on the Xbox, it's nothing new, but it feels like it took so long to run at a BIOS level because we already had it there for so long. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, a part of modding, at least for me, like a big draw of modding is just doing things just because we can. It's like, is there a point to this? Yes or no? But like, is it possible? Yeah, let's make it possible. So that's what I love about it.
For sure, and I think nothing exemplifies that more than the 256 megabyte mod, because it's an amount of memory that basically nobody asked for. And
Right.
in its current state, you actually have to sacrifice performance to get this extra useless memory.
Is the actual like speed that the RAM chips run at slower?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have been unable to get them running at full speed. They can run almost at full speed, and you can compensate by overclocking the CPU.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not a limitation of the chip itself. As far as I know, the chip datasheet says it should go way faster than the Xbox can drive it.
I know you mentioned you did some kind of skin editing and stuff before, but were these RAM projects kind of your first foray into making things for the Xbox or for consoles in general, for that matter?
That's right. Some real hardcore modding. That is my first, yeah.
So just jumping in the deep end, right on.
Yeah, I think you have to really. There's so many things that have been done for the Xbox already. It can be hard to find something new to do, I think. That 128 megabyte mod for the 1.6, I feel like so many people had thought about that. I really liked how people would say that's impossible. Oh yeah, you can upgrade this memory on every Xbox revision, but you can't do it on this one. That's very tempting for me.
But I guess I should take a moment and just explain for anyone who's like less knowledgeable about this topic. So just make sure we're all on the same page and make sure all of our listeners are on the same page. So the 1.0 to 1.4 and 1.5, I guess, have 64 megabytes of RAM installed by default out of the factory. They have empty pads where where modders at least can add additional RAM units, or RAM chips, I should say, that bring that level up to 128 megabytes, which matches what development kit Xbox has had, because they needed that extra overhead to run things, in the background and send, crash reports and stuff like that. So the motherboards that were used in the retail Xboxes are basically the same, more or less the same ones that were used in retail kits, except there was RAM chips removed to save on cost. But what Prehistoric Man has figured out is, at least with the 1.6 versions, well, actually, you can probably explain it better than I can. How did you actually how did you actually develop this, and how does it work as far as the 1.6 RAM?
Sure. So the Xbox motherboard is double-sided, and half the RAM is on top, half the RAM is on bottom. For the 1.6, Microsoft, I don't know why they did this, just to be obtuse, right? They didn't give us a footprint to put the RAM on half of the slots. Yeah, and without the footprint, then you don't have anything to solder to. But what's tantalizing is you can still see the termination resistors on the side that doesn't have the RAM.
Right.
So it was just making me think. And yeah, just one day I thought, right, let's take a proper look into this. How are those RAM footprints even connected together? If they were completely independent to each other, then kind of almost all hope is lost. But thankfully, the top and bottom footprints, they basically share every pin except for one. So what you can do is you just piggyback the chip. You stack two RAM chips on top of each other, solder all the pins together, except for the chip select, which needs to be wired manually.
So the stock RAM chip that's already there, it's still connected to the board, and you have another chip on top of it that you solder on top of that existing RAM chip, right? And then you have that.
That's right.
You said the chip select pin goes off, and and then the Xbox tells it, hey, I'm talking to this chip, or hey, I'm talking to this chip, and then whichever chip is being addressed then responds with whatever memory is in its registers, right?
That's right.
It's really lucky that they
And
didn't pull out more then.
it's lucky that we have those little test pads for the chip select connections.
Yeah, definitely.
I am curious. I did want to ask about this. I guess Prehistoric Man, why do you believe? Because I mean, this is a pretty the 128 megabyte RAM mod for 1.6 is newer from you, but why do you think it took so long into the life cycle? It took like almost like 20 years to do that, and not necessarily for you, but I'm more just kind of wondering why you or anyone else might think that like no one else had really found this or like went through with it or tried to tackle it properly before then.
That's a good question. I really don't know. Because it is not that complicated, right? There's nothing to do in software even.
So was just kind of from your own volition of looking at the board and seeing, oh, there's kind of like echoes of the pads that used to be there from earlier versions. Like
Yeah,
this didn't come about from like a conversation you had, where people were like brainstorming, but rather just you looking
that's
at it
right.
and trying it.
It also helped that I only had a 1.6 Xbox at the time. And I felt like I was kind of missing out by not being able to have that extra memory.
Hmm. So and this is something we talked about on a past episode, and talking about what do we actually do with this new memory, and you kind of touched on this just a little bit ago. So what do you see maybe we can kind of guesstimate a little bit here, but what do you see being the sort of use cases for this sort of thing? What would you like to see people use this for?
I have some vague ideas. If you watch the Macho Nacho video, you'll see what we did was we loaded, I think, an 8K video into XBMC. This is silly. Of course, the Xbox's output capability can nowhere near achieve that resolution. But the fact that it could load that video into RAM, it had enough RAM to be able to play that video, was the point of that.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
seeing that in Tito's video, trying to wrap my head around how that would even work. But it just kind of proves that it can chunk up the video enough to where it could theoretically play if, the frame rate is going to be crap, but it can at least begin to load it, right?
exactly. So for the MPEG or XVID decoding, then it has to load in the current frame and maybe some future frames as well, all into memory at the same time so that it can process those and display it. But yeah, as for practical purposes of this much memory, currently there are none that I'm aware of. Maybe running Linux or something like this.
Hmm.
It could open up some future things. One that I've had stuck in my mind, but I would be absolutely ill-equipped to perform, is to load multiple XBEs into memory at the same time. If you play a modern Xbox, then what you're probably used to doing is playing a game, and you can just press the Xbox button and go back to the dashboard. And then you can play another game, and you can switch between them quite rapidly. Wouldn't it be
Right.
awesome if the original Xbox could do that too, just by loading everything into RAM?
Or that maybe could even open up things like having a persistent like overlay or something like that. But in kind of what you're talking
Exactly,
about,
that'd be great.
it sounds like you could just kind of swap between like the upper half of 128 and the bottom half, and you might have an XBE in both sides, and you're just rapidly switching, back and forth. That's a very interesting idea. I haven't thought about that before.
It's the only real idea I came up with for practical uses.
Right, right.
Because the Xbox is just so constrained by the CPU in particular. Having more RAM doesn't really help it, and with the resolution, and yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your testing and kind of manufacturing process? Like, I know this is kind of an early project for you, and you're still kind of working on it, at least in terms of the 256 megabyte upgrade. Like, what was the process like for building this thing?
Yeah, it's quite a long time ago. What I did was I made this little PCB. You need to have a PCB. Okay, that's the starting point. So why did I make a PCB to act as an interposer between this BGA chip and the LQFP, the full size chip? It's because if you do a chip search for LQFPs, then you'll find that the original Xbox already uses the largest chip that you can buy in that size. So there was simply no other option. You can't add more chips. The reason you can't add more chips is because you don't have more chip select signals to use. So the only option is to have each chip be a larger memory. And there's an address bus that addresses these chips, and it works on rows and columns. And what tends to happen is that you have fewer columns than rows, which means that the original Xbox used, I think, 8 bits on the column bus, but there were actually 12 wires available. So you could just add more bits. You can just add more columns. And that's a very easy way to add more memory. So I did my research. I checked what chips were available, and indeed I found they still used the same amount of address bits in total, but it added another column address bit, which is exactly what we needed to be compatible with the Xbox.
Almost as if the people who designed the motherboard were just leaving little Easter eggs for us to find little later on.
I think we can see that in mods of all consoles, that when you look at the hardware, it can do a lot more than it was made to do. You know, these things were built down to a cost, and you can just add more components.
Especially with the Xbox, with its kind of PC-based platform too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the VGA chips existed when the Xbox launched. With the larger
I think
capacities
that's
and
true.
speeds.
I think that's true. I think the chip that I'm using, it's from Hynix. I think it was made in 2004.
Yeah, most likely on a video card, not even an actual motherboard, like or a DIMM for a computer. It would probably be like
Yeah.
an old Radeon card. You were saying about costing down, and I think universally we all think that the 1.6 was the cost down unit. Like Microsoft was still talking about it costing $70 for a hard drive when they were producing the thing for like $130. So they had to get the cost down as far as possible, and that's why they skimped on as many components as possible at the end.
I didn't know that about the prices. So do you think they were selling the Xbox at a loss as a whole?
I mean, I think they were talking about selling the Xbox at a loss from the get-go just to get the software out there.
Yeah, didn't like for the correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read the statistic that throughout the Xbox's life cycle, the only month it was actually profitable was the month Halo 2 came out. Isn't that right?
Really?
That's what I've read at least, and I didn't know the exact number on the hard drive, but I do remember I actually didn't have internet access for a while, so I had magazines, but I remember reading in a magazine that the hard drive was kind of the killer cost on there. It was so expensive to put a hard drive in.
And yet they still did it.
They did, yeah. And I don't even think it was a hard drive itself. I think it was more just kind of the contract that they had with the hard drive manufacturers. Just it more benefited the hard drive manufacturers as opposed to Microsoft.
Yeah, I think Mario is onto something. I think it was something along the lines that they had lost just on the original Xbox. It was a $4 billion loss because they were selling it at less than what it was costing them to make.
Right. Which is a pretty normal strategy for console manufacturers. Sell it at a loss, make it up in software sales. And imagine what that must be like for the people, the financial managers who have to be like, yeah, we're making these things, but everyone we sell, it's just costing us money, and you're kind of banking on and gambling for the future.
Yep, Microsoft did not want to do hardware. The Xbox is a really weird project for them.
Right. So, Prehistoricman, talking about the 256 mod still, so at this point, it hasn't been released and all that. I understand you're still working on it. So just for our listeners, can we kind of get an idea of where the project stands? And I hope you don't hear this as me saying, when, release it now. So, don't mean to rush you or anything like that, but can you kind of give us a sneak peek into where it's at right now?
Actually, I enjoy working under a little bit of pressure. I feel it's very useful for motivation, because things can go a lot faster than they usually do. That's my experience. So it's progressing in terms of hardware. There is one issue with the hardware that I made already, which is that when you assemble it, it's quite likely that you'll actually break it. It's because of the way this rigid flex board works that you have to bend the flexible pins down. And when you do that, you create a crack along those pins. And it was my mistake that I routed some of the signals across the top side. And that is the side that gets the bending force. And that means you disconnect those signals while installing the chip. And also, I just wanted several improvements. So currently, I don't have a script that would convert an old school BIOS to be able to support this. You do need some changes to the Xcodes. Thankfully, that's quite easy to patch. And I just wanted the hardware to work properly, at least. Even if I never managed to fix the speed issue, you still have to run it a bit slower than stock. I think we can live with that. but it has to give a good experience for the installer, for the user, and
So there's
not just be a nightmare of I've installed it, but it kind of works, and then I turn it on tomorrow and it doesn't work, and then it comes to summer and it works again. This is the kind of experience that I was having. I sent some chips off to Modsville, and he really bent those pins. He made them into the typical L-shape leaded pins, and I thought, okay, interesting. But it turns out that almost every single one was cracked then. So what I'm thinking is, I either need a fully flexible PCB, and the flex is nice because you get really small sizes. They have to put it through a high precision process, and these boards are small. Or if I could have a high precision, solid, a rigid PCB, a typical PCB, just the problem there is that usually they have a very low tolerance on the board outline, and connecting the pins of the board to the motherboard is the biggest challenge. I did a run through with JLC PCB. I just said, let's try it. See if they can make these castellated holes work. Castellated holes, that's where you make a normal via, but then when they're routing the board, they just cut through the via halfway. So then you're left with half a via, and you can then solder that. The problem is, because of the poor tolerance, they basically destroyed the via on almost every single one.
So
That's
at the
fair.
moment, it's just kind of improving, making it more reliable, and kind of switching away from the sort of folded technique. And what's sort of your ideas of how to get around that?
I think the flex PCB is a good idea. Then it'll be nice and thin. Hopefully I can make castellations. But if I can't, then I'll try Harcroft's idea of just soldering the via. And if that doesn't work, then maybe I'll think of something else. Having the flex is quite nice, though, especially for my automated testing setup. It relies on having some flexibility in the PCB to make a consistent contact all around those 100 pins.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the next natural question is 256 the upper limit that we'll see? Will we eventually see a 512 megabyte mod in the future, do you think?
I think it won't happen. It won't happen in the same way as this one. Now, if you guys know about Stellar OS, you know it has some extra memory on board the mod chip, and
Right.
it can use that memory to help the BIOS. So this is a way that you're kind of getting extra RAM in the system, but it's through the mod chip instead. I am not sure about the limits of that. I haven't looked into that kind of thing at all. But yes, to answer your question, I am fairly sure that 256 is the limit. The reason is that that columns count that I was talking about, if you try and put it one higher, it actually doesn't work. It treats it as if it's still got the amount of columns for 256 megabytes. So memory is laid out in a matrix, really. It's you can think of it like a spreadsheet where you've got columns and rows. Okay, it's a bit unintuitive with bits because we're using bits here. So when you add one bit, that actually doubles the amount of columns or doubles the amount of rows. We can't increase the amount of rows because this is a hardware limitation. You would need to add more pins to the chip. But we do have unused column bits. So you can double the amount of columns by adding a bit. And yeah, I tried adding 2 bits, and it seemed, based on the signals that I was reading, that only a single bit was added.
So like you were saying, if there is an upgrade beyond 256, it's not going to be through this columns and rows, method here, because you just
That's
basically
right.
run out.
It won't be through adding additional memory onto the motherboard into the typical RAM slots.
Keep in mind that any RAM you connect on a mod chip through the LPC header will essentially be able communicate at the limit of the speed of the LPC header, not at normal memory frequencies or speed. The interesting thing about that is you can use it for on-the-fly patching or debugging stuff. Anything not your Xbox wouldn't normally do, but you're not going to use it to like really pump your performance up.
Right. Yeah, and I think the graphics wouldn't be able to use that as a frame buffer, for example.
Well, I hope we revisit this a year or two from now, and all of a sudden you can just put SD RAM. Someone made an adapter that just allows you to put PC RAM in it. Who knows what'll happen?
Funny.
I mean, so much has happened over the past 20 years. You know, if you would have told someone from 2001 that we would have 16 terabyte hard drives and 256 megabytes of RAM and 1.4 gigahertz upgrades, like that's crazy. And that's one thing that makes me love working on the Xbox in particular is that you can just like hot rod the crap out of these things. So it's very interesting to see what the progress you've made with the RAM upgrades. Even if it's not that useful right now, it's a tool in someone's toolbox that they can use when they're making an app, right? So maybe XBMC will use it. I doubt for 8K videos, but we'll see. Also, I wanted to touch on a subject and just kind of clear the air a little bit. So a couple months ago, I want to say in July, basically around the time that you released your project, or at least announced it, Tito put up a video and showcased your mod and went in through the whole process and talked about it and stuff like that. Tito then posts a tweet talking about it, and then we see the MakeMHz account repost it and say basically 256 megabyte support is coming to Stellar. So I guess my first question is, are you related to the MakeMHz group at all? Are you guys working together or collaborating at all?
Our affiliation started on that day of that tweet. And this is not some kind of close bond or anything. He basically said, well done. And would you like to share any details? We had a little discussion. He had an idea for me that could solve the speed issue. So I gave it a try. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And that's basically where we finished off. We haven't said anything to each other in a few months. And, I don't have anything against the guy. He's been good to me, I'll say. Although the tweet was a bit strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify, and just because that was a point of confusion, I think, because at that time when he made that announcement, he didn't claim this, so there is room for interpretation, I suppose. But a few people I talked to got the impression that you two were kind of working behind the scenes, and this was going to be a cool new feature coming to Stellar. So the reason why I say that is just the tone of it came out like a product announcement, and so when I saw that, I reached out to you and was like, "Hey, is this the case?" And you told me no. We just met today and stuff. So, anyways, so that's the story of how I got blocked by MakeMHz on Twitter, is because I clarified that. So, anyways, just wanted to ask you about that and see kind of your stance on it.
That was unfortunate. I don't know what his problem is. I did send him a message saying something like, basically complaining about the wording of that tweet, because it was really implying that MakeMHz was the one driving this. I'd made an alternative to their thing, and that even we potentially had a history of working together.
Mm-hmm.
But no, as far as I know, mine was first. I made the first hardware out of anyone that would support this memory.
Yeah. And I appreciate you commenting on that. I don't mean to derail the conversation or kind of make bad remarks about MakeMHz. That's just kind of a relevant topic because it's something you and I experienced. And just for listeners out there, Stellar is adding support, like they've teased and hinted at having 256 meg support at least in the near future. So no reason to doubt that. We'll see what happens, and we'll see and how both projects play in the ecosystem.
Yeah,
But
and I just want to say for the record, there's no chance I'm going to be bought out or anything like that. I'm not going to the dark side. If I will always push this open source. So if he says it works on Stellar, that's cool. I want to make it work on everything.
well, very cool. So switching gears, we're going to talk to Mr. Mario 2011 next, or also known as just Mario. So Mario has been a respected voice in the retro and modern gaming communities for many years. He's especially well known for his work in making video guides on a variety of topics, from jailbreaking, installing and setting up mods for different consoles, and a lot more. Since launching his YouTube channel in 2008, Mario has amassed over 230,000 subscribers and a combined 54 million views across all of his videos. His videos for the original Xbox in particular have been a resource that I've shared with newcomers countless times for anyone new coming into the scene who's pulled their Xbox out of the attic or closet, dusted it off, and are looking for guides and tutorials about how to use Endgame, to use Rocky Five's installer, and all that sort of stuff. His videos are a resource that have been very beneficial to the modding community, and I'm thrilled to have him on and pick his brain and hear what he has to say about our beloved consoles here. Thank you so much for coming on, Mario. Welcome, and we're thrilled to chat with you.
No, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. I will say as well too to Scotch, dude, I appreciate you consistently inviting me on. I know he's been asking me to come on since the first episode, and I've been very much saying it's like, no, I want to come on. It's just that the timing just never worked. But I was like, please, just like keep me in your thoughts. Just invite me. I do want to come on. I'm not trying to snub you here.
No, yeah, totally.
Yeah,
But honestly, that's probably for the best, because the first episode, I think we had like 8 speakers, and the next episode was also a lot of people. So it all worked out, all in good time, right?
yeah. It's kind of it's fun having some chaos with the first few episodes and such. I actually did think of this earlier. I did want to drop an exclusive on you all and start off with a confession, if that would be okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So I just checked my, I guess my password manager and such, because we're recording on the Xbox Scene Discord server here, which is not affiliated with the original Xbox Scene, of course, but I never had an account on Xbox Scene, the original site. I have one on xboxscene.info, but I never had one on the original site, if y'all can believe that.
Well, he's cut. Thank you everyone for joining. We're gonna end this.
It wasn't my fault, man. It wasn't my fault. I actually tried because I've been using forums since I was like, you check the box saying you're 13. I was below 13 when I was on these forums, right? And for whatever reason, I could never make an account on Xbox Scene. And then how many times did it go down? I try and get back on, and I try to make an account, and they would not validate or whatever. I don't know. It was that and the Team Executor site. I always had issues making accounts on there.
I have a confession. Back in the day, I was on Xbox HQ. I think there was a very strong rivalry between the HQ and the Xbox Scene.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Dude, one of my favorite things I'll say it's funny on the topic of videos. I was watching a old video because sometimes I love rewatching like old tutorials from like 2010 that are just like 4:3 and like 8 pixels or something like that. And it was from Carolina Gamer, where he was showing some stuff on the 360 when I was first getting modded. And I forget about this detail, and it made me laugh. Like he's like going through, I think it was like how to change the region code on a 360, and like right at the end, he's just like, "Hey, so I'm Carolina Gamer on here, and also I got banned on Xbox Scene at XboxHacker.net. So if y'all can like go onto the forums and tell them to unban me, that'd be great."
So, was the Xbox your first foray into modding, or did you have anything before that that was sort of your first glimpse into modded consoles?
Oh, okay, so I knew about Xbox modding for a while. I will say, as a kid, at one point for a few years, I didn't have internet access, so I was literally like, I'd go to the bookstore and learn things, or like talk to kids on the playground. Where it's like I was young at the time, so like nobody was actually modding their systems. They all like knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, that type of thing. Um, or I would, be going on to forums. I could go to the library, learn about it there. My first big foray into modding where I actually did something with the system was the original PlayStation. And that was all to play Thrill Kill. where I learned about it, like the most infamous unreleased game on there. And really, my goal was just to get a copy of the game, get it up and running. Like I had kind of the tools and all that. I just didn't really know what to do, and I couldn't take anything apart. Parents didn't want me to take anything apart. Didn't trust anyone to send the system to. Nobody in my town I knew had a soldering iron. I wasn't going to get one, so end up having to convince my parents to order a Breaker Pro, I want to say was what it was called, from, I think it was mod-chip.com. Picked the cheapest shipping. We thought we got scammed, but we didn't. But it took like 3 or 4 months to get the system, like to get the disc and everything. And then I just, had the spring, put it in the back of the PlayStation, was able to swap it. The game played horribly because that's one of the few games where it's like doing a disc swap has a lot of issues on there with the engine, how it's designed. But that was my first foray in that. In terms of the original Xbox, I think it was 2005, 2006, something like that. I ended up, like, I saw countless videos on soft modding and all that, then ended up was able to convince my mom to get me a Action Replay. It was like $15 or so from a local game shop, and then went on to the Action Replay service and everything, downloaded the saves, copied them over, did the soft mod. It wasn't a great soft mod. I kind of broke it in a way too, where like I remember I ended up getting an error, and I was very disheartened because it was like my first system that I still have, and then I had to essentially re-soft mod the system, which was able to work. And for like years, I couldn't get into the original dashboard at all, but I never took it onto live or anything. So those were the big ones, at least. I think the original Xbox was like the second console that I did mod, but the first one was the OG PlayStation.
Do you still have that PlayStation?
The original one?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking on there. No, I don't think I do. I think I tried to do a mod chip install in that one, and I was very overconfident with my soldering, and y'all know how it goes. The solder doesn't stick to things. It's not working properly, and I end up like lifting a few things, and either the disc didn't spin or it just didn't do any video output after that, and I was very disheartened. But for what it's worth, I eventually did take that same mod chip and I tried it in like 2 or 3 other systems. I killed 2 more systems, and then the third one, I finally got it installed.
Yeah, there's something to be said about using the incorrect tools when you're just starting out, like as a kid modding. Like I'm no stranger to that myself. I think my first soldering iron was one of those ones that are usually used for plumbing. The ones that have like a chrome tip at the end and it's super fat and hot. That was my very first soldering iron. And I feel like if you can master that, or at least get good enough to use it and make it work, like everything else is going to be a breeze. That's like starting on hard mode. But when you're a kid, you gotta, you don't have the right tools, you don't have the right soldering iron, like you said. But I think
I
that's
was
great skill
li-
in
li-
his degree.
Yeah. For me, I'll just admit I was overconfident. Like the first time I ever soldered, it was like we had like a exploring technology course in middle school, and they gave us like a little, like a big PCB, and you end up putting like a few LED components on there, and you like wire up a battery and stuff, and it's a little robot that blinks at you. And the pads on there are so huge, so even if you are horrible at soldering, you can get this done. And so I'm thinking like, oh, okay, I know how to solder this fine. Like 3 or 4 years later, it's like, dude, I'm using like I made a run to Radio Shack when it was still a store at the time. It's like I got the soldering iron, which was not great. I got the solder, but I didn't know the proper techniques. Like to clean it off, I had that dirty sponge that you like put some water on, you're wiping it down. I
Right.
didn't know flux was a thing at all. I'm sitting there wondering why things aren't. I wasn't using the proper alcohol. I was using rubbing alcohol, not isopropyl. So I just didn't. I was just way too overconfident. I just did not have a proper understanding of how it worked.
Well, even still though, everyone has to start somewhere. And that's like
Of
we see
course.
people coming into the scene a lot. And that's one reason why all your videos are such a great resource is people can kind of see. Because it's one thing back in our day, we used to have text guides. People weren't,
Mhm.
people didn't have cameras as much and audio equipment. It wasn't quite as much of a commodity back, kind of a decade or two ago. So people coming on, they get to see you actually working on these Xboxes step by step instead of following a text guide. And there's been so many times back in the day where it'd be like, am I doing this right? Is that what they mean? But being able to see it
Mhm.
is such a great resource. And I hope it's I hope it's been useful. I know it has been. I mean, the success of your channel has kind of proved that, right?
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'm one of those people. I don't take the compliments super well with that because to me, I'm around myself 25 hours a day. So I'm just like, okay, I'm just a normal person. I'm just uploading MP4 videos. But and I always say, I'm like, dude, like if you're gonna donate, if you're gonna like pay anyone props or anything, it's always the developers. It's always these servers. It's always the sites because and I always like give credit where credit is due. Because some people they might try. If I make something which is minimal, I'll take credit for that. But aside from that, like there's sometimes people might say like, hey, like you're taking credit for this. I'm like, no, I'm citing all my sources here. I already provided that info. But that
Right.
was actually what got me into it. It was like when I started becoming consistent, it was in not related to my channel number or anything, but in the year 2011, I had a flash DVD drive in a Xbox 360. And like you all know, it's the same thing. You go onto all these forums, and first of all, there's outdated information. Secondly, you're going to get flamed for things. Third, it's like people telling you RTFM, but you don't know where the manual is.
Yeah.
Then there's a lot of people who already have that technical knowledge and prowess, which like this is not just a normal thing, like even building a computer. It's weird. You're taking a proprietary game console and taking it apart and then modifying the firmware on the DVD drive. That's nothing normal at all. So a lot of people were making assumptions and just saying, hey, in order to flash this drive, it's easy. You do this, 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 and you're done. But it doesn't work like that. So like one of the things that hung me up for like literally days was if you're going through Jungle Flasher and you're hooking up your drive directly through a SATA interface, it works the best if you hook it up into the SATA 0 port on your motherboard. And I found after like 3 or 4 days of looking, I found one place that said that. And I finally hooked it up on this computer that was taken apart and it was able to recognize. So really, this was just like when I first started getting some traction videos, it was me doing that. And they were not good videos. I had a camcorder and I literally I was recording the screen. I didn't have a tripod, nothing like that. And the videos were chunked out into multiple parts because that's how old school YouTube was. But at the time, it was just, hey, I just kind of racked my brain and I've been pulling my hair out and losing sleep for the last few nights trying to figure out how to flash this DVD drive or, do anything else on here. Now that I know how to do it, I'm going to show you all how to do this here. I'm putting in all the details because there was one guide that talked about the SATA 0 port, and none of the other guides I saw talked about it. And that was my
Yeah.
biggest hang up. So that's really where like my love of this started, where I was like, I just want to take this advanced information, kind of recompile it, and put it into something that a layman can understand.
Oh, absolutely. There's something we said for accessibility. Like it's not just having the information there. Like I was saying a second ago, like having text that is hard to follow, and especially for newcomers who aren't familiar with all these terms and stuff like that. It's yeah, you gotta have to like see it from the perspective of the other side. Someone who doesn't know what this is and doesn't know that that might be a stumbling block.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then of course like people, like either like gatekeeping information or just like flaming or something. Just like, dude, just shut up. Just help them out or clarify this or something. And I'm okay, with newcomers, asking for help and such as long as they put in some effort. But it's very much like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? It's like, dude, you have I tell people you have the same resources I do. You have a phone, you have a computer, you have an internet connection. You have the exact same resources I do.
Right.
There's an important thing about what you're describing, though, is a lot of the developers of these projects can't accurately or properly get the information out there. They're not like a news source. They're not an educator. But
Mhm.
where you come in is you educate people. Like you need that voice to get the most accurate and the most helpful information out there, whereas the developer probably can't provide that in a lot of cases.
For sure. And first of all, I appreciate that. And secondly, like, no, it's even, I mean, talking with people such as yourself, like Harcroft, like there's been, I know Harcroft was really instrumental in helping me with like one video, for example, which was all about Xbox 360, no, original Xbox hard drive, unlocking hard drive keys and such. And he provided a good amount of information, like a lot of like use cases, which people think. Because for me, originally I was just like, okay, hey, just null the DVD, null the hard drive key. Of course, with Insignia and other things that are changing, even just like save games breaking, I didn't know, at the time when I was making original videos about like the importance of needing that hard drive key for a eventual Xbox Live reboot. Other information coming through with all that. So it's been helpful talking with developers and actually like kind of like getting that and getting even some of the fringe cases or even like lesser known cases. Because I'll say for me, my channel is just me, myself, and I. That's it. I don't have editors. I don't have people looking for stuff. I'm the only one who's running the channel. So getting that information is really helpful, and actually like having relationships with these developers does help out quite a bit.
So yeah, you've made tons of videos over the years talking about covering the original Xbox and of course other consoles, but kind of focusing on the original Xbox. You've obviously made tons of videos for it.
Mhm.
What about this console, in your opinion, kind of makes it unique in terms of its modding potential compared to others? Like even modern consoles, like I know you do a lot of like PS4 jailbreaking, and you've recently talked about some of the Xbox One exploits that have come out. Is there anything in particular like that makes sort of the original Xbox stand out as like a good platform for people to get into to mod and things like that?
No, I have to think on that a little. I think for me, the first main thing is like it was the original Xbox was actually my first video game system. So it's very much like something that's near and dear to me. But secondly, it's just seeing all the developments. Like even back then, like back in the day, the big thing was, hey, you can completely change this system in ways that we weren't expecting. Like, you know, you boot it up, you have the dashboard, you can rip CDs to it and stuff. You can play great games, you can get online, all that stuff's cool. I never had the original Xbox Live, so I never had that capability. However, being able to run custom BIOS, being able to, this is a big deal back in the day, but play your DVD movies without having to have the dongle, having homebrew
Right.
on there, different kind of modifications, even stuff, again, like this is like kid stuff on the playground, everything. Maybe the most outlandish thing I heard was there was someone who told me that if you mod the system, you can burn CDs on it, which I've never, I know we can
Yeah.
laugh at it now, but I've never seen that. And that was just like, you know, playground rumors and things. It's stuff like, hey, my friend has Grand Theft Auto 4 on PS2. It's stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So
That kind of
you
stuff is
won't know
common.
how that goes. But no, with that system, it was just seeing the true capabilities of it, and even like getting up to, well, I mean, years. This is surpassed years ago, but like at the time, getting up to 2 terabyte drives working, and then like years later, I was looking into the hack for how that worked, and I was explaining it to one of my friends who's a developer, and he's like, "That's actually really cool." So really, just making the impossible completely possible on there. Of course, then, you know, back in the day, the whole like piracy aspect is it's attractive for a kid who can't afford these games. So back when Blockbuster was a thing, what was the thing everyone was doing? They would get an Xbox, upgrade the hard drive, and they were going to Blockbuster renting games using DVD to Xbox to rip them over. Not saying you should do
Yeah.
that now, but that's just how it was, you know, when we're like 12, 13, 14, whatever it is. Xbox Media Center was a big thing as well too, network capability. So just being able to completely do what you wanted to on that system was really awesome. Plus, the game library on it is fantastic. So there's originality there. There's great titles on there that we either see remastered or they're kind of just locked to that system in some way. And if you want to play original Xbox games, I tell people the best and most accurate way to play original Xbox games is on an original Xbox. Yeah, and this is how do I put it? I didn't even sorry there was a part two to that because I was going to say I was talking about just like the old stuff that I loved about it, but even the new things you're seeing, of course, the Insignia project, you're seeing hard drives go up to 16 terabytes. You're seeing Cerbios. You're seeing even external tools such as Fat Explorer getting really awesome updates on there. So if you're kind of like to newcomers, if you're wanting to rediscover the original Xbox or even like discover it for the first time, it is a fantastic system to jump into.
And it's also never been easier too, especially with Endgame coming out and now with the Modxo mod chips that are just a
Yeah.
generic off the shelf, you know, commodity item that's $5.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a very cool time for new people to be coming into the scene. So you kind of touched on a second ago, you know, the common thing you do as a kid, as a broke teenager who can't afford a $60 game. You know, sometimes you go down to Blockbuster and rip a game or whatever. Um, so a lot of this stuff kind of deals with getting around certain blocks and stuff. Can I ask what are your ideas of where do you toe that line as far as um, you know, the things you talk about and the things that you promote in your videos and things like that. Because a lot of this can be kind of a gray area, and I think 20 years later,
Of
it's not
course.
not as big of a deal. But what's your kind of general stance on sort of preservation topic when it comes to that?
For me, the biggest thing has always been, I remember this as I think a good example is actually I had the PSP 1000, and on the 2000 upwards, when you have the extra RAM and such, you get extra benefits on there, mainly with like speed increases with loading and such. But one thing I loved about that system was if you had custom firmware on it, of course, you could rip your UMD discs onto the memory stick Pro Duo on there. And it was nice because it saved it saved the disk drive itself, so you don't have, that annoying sound from the UMD drive on there.
And the
Of course, you have them
battery
like
life too.
battery life, of course. The loading times are much quicker. So, like my friend who's on a 2000 with a disk, and I'm on a 1000 loading the ISO, my speeds might be about equivalent in terms of loading there. So, really, the performance is nice and saving everything on there. And that's kind of how I've always been with it. Like, several years ago, I really buffed up my original Xbox collection back when you could go to thrift stores. This is pre-pandemic era, but you can go to thrift stores and you can get a stack of 20 Xbox games for $18, something like that. So I pretty much bought every original Xbox game I was wanting to, but every single one I would immediately take it, pop it into the disk drive, rip the files over, and back them up. So that way I have the collection, like the games that I do want, and I do believe if you want some, if you love it, make sure you get it if you're able to. But I have my games on my shelf. They're nice and safe. If I ever want to rip them, or if if someone wants to borrow them, or I want to play them off disc, whatever, they're going to be safe in that regard. But I can still play them on the system. It's going to be upgraded. I'm going to have nicer loading times. I'll save the disk drive, and we all know that disk drives on these systems have been kind of dying left and right on here. So it's always been a thing of the performance increase, and then being able to preserve the software and the hardware as well too. In terms of, I guess, how towing the line on there, you all see, and this is something I do, like I always show like backing up your games, and I truly believe in being able to back up that software and being able to preserve it. You don't see me in videos going on to like a torrent site and pulling a game from there, because that's not what I'm wanting to promote on it. There's even been people, like when I show these, people are like, okay, do you really own these games? And I'll take a picture. I'm like, yes, I do. I have them right here, because these are the games I have. I grew up with them. I want to preserve them, especially like some like PlayStation 1 games, for example. I was buying a lot of PS1 games when nobody cared about the PS1. So now that they're a lot more expensive, I do want to preserve them. Same with the original Xbox. So that's kind of always where I've stayed at on there. But in terms of like, things back in the day, yeah, that it's like I missed out on this, which I'm disappointed, but this is kind of a trust thing with me. I didn't want to trust someone with my original Xbox, especially since it was the very first system I had. There was a college student I spoke to, and this is again like 20 some years ago. He had bought an original Xbox explicitly to get it modded up and get his games from Blockbuster and such. But he was telling me, he's like, yeah, there's a guy in the dorm. He's trustworthy. If you bring him your original Xbox and a hard drive of your choosing, and you pay him like $50 or $100, he'll hard mod the system for you. He'll drop the hard drive in. I have no idea what kind of mod he was doing, but that was the big appeal of it, which, that was, of course, rampant on college campuses. So, I mean, that's how it was back then for, broke teenagers, kids, college students, whatever it was. Now, like, now that funding's a little better and everything, I buy what I play, and that's how it is there. But in terms of like current day and such, I'm not going to support the piracy aspect of that. Like if people are saying like, hey, I got my game from this website, I do block that. In all honesty, I do. But the thing I don't like is you got to realize this stuff too. It's when you'll see sellers who they'll sell like a preloaded Xbox or 360 for like $800, and it has all these mods, and it has like a 2 terabyte drive full of every game on there. Yeah, there is a market for that, but at the same time, like in terms of you were even saying like there's a kind of gray aspect to it, it makes scenes like this look darker than they should be, and it can attract eyes on it that like scenes don't want to have, and that's something that the original Xbox and all these other console scenes have always struggled with. So it's a hard line to toe. I can just control what I can control on there, and that's the most power that I have.
Right. That's very well said. Yeah, you can't really. It's a big community, especially when you get into those other consoles too. I mean, in the original Xbox communities, just in the ones that a couple of us manage here, there's something like 80,000 or 85,000 people just in our couple groups. I mean, there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. So it's maybe incorrect to look if one person does something and is stupid about it and too vocal, you're right. It can paint the whole scene in a certain way. But I think, and hopefully what shines through is the sort of community and collaborative effort that we're all doing to keep this console alive 20 years later, right?
For sure.
So you obviously introduce a lot of people who are not particularly skilled, who might be newcomers and things like that. Are there any sort of common stumbling blocks, or like, someone who is looking to get into maybe modding their Xbox or a different console, one of the ones that you cover? Are there any sort of essential tools, recommendations, tips? What are some of those stumbling blocks that maybe you as a newbie ran into a bunch, that maybe you can give advice to some other people listening?
Sure. I'm kind of a believer. I only half joke about this, but I think we need to bring flaming back. In terms of you go to, if you 20 years ago, back in the day, if you go onto a forum and you're just saying, you make a new thread and you start messaging people like, hey, I need help with my Xbox, help me, like, you're gonna get flamed, you're gonna get banned. There's forums I've done that on, not necessarily with that, but like way back in the day where I got flamed, and I've learned from that, and we don't really have that as much now. So I will try to like bring it to a more modern standard where I think if you're a new person, first of all, communication is going to be important. You need to properly communicate, like, respectfully. Put the details of what you're trying to do. Put in the information of what you're trying to provide. Give steps of what you've tried to pull off. At least show some effort and be respectful about it. That's the biggest thing. And I think the second thing that's kind of goes hand in hand with that is, I will still say Google Foo. You really do need to search, but I mean, Google search has been kind of crap the last few years or so. So that is understandably harder to do, but it's not impossible to do. And if you can actually like communicate and articulate what you're trying to do, what you have done, and you can look things up, that's fine, because then you can get to a point where you can say, hey, I tried this, I did this here, I'm getting this error, here is the error code, what can I do on this, or what direction can I go? And if you're able to provide those, you're going to get much farther in these scenes and with other people helping you than just saying, help me, I don't know what to do. In terms of actual like tools and such, having a computer, having USB drives is going to be absolutely paramount with this. I see way too many people who try to do this on a Chromebook or a phone or an iPad or something, and especially with these old consoles, you're not going to be able to get that same flexibility on there. So even if you can go to a thrift store and you can find an old laptop that you can just like quickly get like a Windows 7 or like some kind of like Linux image onto, that's going to bring you so much further than just working off of your phone for everything. And it shouldn't cost you as much as you would expect, because I think I still see mainly with younger people who they think like you need $4,000 to, build a desktop or something. No, you don't need that. But really it's just the I would say communication, actually looking for what you're trying to say, articulating, and then just for the love of God, have a computer, please. And now it's going to get you so much further than so many other people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I mean, I do agree that things have changed since the days of forums, when Discord has kind of taken over, which for better or for worse, right? It's definitely a lot harder to search for that wealth of information. I mean, a lot of these things are just happening in conversations in Discord, which, I mean, that's a whole topic in of itself. But I do agree that things have changed from back then to now. And yeah, we are a little bit more accommodating of people who are just kind of dropping in for a second, hey, I got this Xbox, I only have a couple hours to do with this, and they're kind of looking for a fast answer, and I get that. But yeah, you got to be willing to ask the right questions. You got to be willing to give us information. I mean, we get people all the time dropping in just like, hey, my Xbox doesn't turn on. We're like, okay, how, like, what happened? Does the light turn on? Do you get video? Like, we have to sort of pry for information. So I think that's a great piece of advice, is put in some effort when you're seeking help.
We as in, I think anybody in this call, we are willing to help people. One, if we have the time, and two, if you're actually wanting to help yourself on there. And I think that's another thing on time. I think with having everyone so accessible, with the likes of, Twitter or Discord or anything else, there's a entitlement overall on the internet of, hey, you can reach out to anyone, anywhere, anytime, regardless of the level. But I come from the old school internet where it's people can hate you for whatever reason, and nobody is entitled to your time, just like you're not entitled to anyone else's time. If I really want to talk to somebody and I am their biggest fan, and I'm like watching all their content, trying to talk to them, or even it could be a developer or anything, they could hate me for whatever reason, or I could never get a response from them. And I'm not going to kick my feet in the dirt over that. It's like it is what it is right there. And I wish there was I wish that boundary was still understood more, but I think in the modern social media era that's kind of lost, unfortunately.
Yep, I definitely agree.
I think today, if you're just kind of starting out, we should direct people to console mods to kind of get the general
Yes.
information, and then to videos like Mr. Mario's if we're looking for more advanced, like hands-on detailed information.
Yeah, I will say I think and while I appreciate that, I think there's even video is not going to be the only thing. There is text-based things are still going to be paramount, going to those text guides. So I know with like the Wii U, the 3DS, there is the infamous, Wii U.hacks.guide, 3DS.hacks.guide. Those are fantastic resources. Console mods, of course, absolutely got the wiki, like whole repository right there. Reddit has pretty much killed off and kind of sort of replaced forums, because you got other forums out there. You got Xbox Scene Info, of course. I know there's like ogxbox.com, there's sites like that, but most people don't really want to run on forums anymore. Even I myself, I notice I'm on forums less. It's kind of it takes up a lot of time. And then when you see, so many databases getting like hacked up and leaked out and everything, you just want to join less forums. But even just having, like centralized like subreddits and such really do help out on there. And it's going to be better than nothing. I'll say it's certainly better than join my Discord, which if there's solutions, which the only thing is, hey, join my Discord, I'm like, absolutely not. I'm not going to be covering that. Please just put it somewhere else.
So Mario, are there any projects that you're very, or are there any projects that you're particularly interested in seeing come to light, like stuff that's sort of just now being worked on and coming out soon? Like, what are some of those projects you're looking forward to covering in the future?
I have to think on this a bit here. I know I don't know if this one's going to go anywhere, but on the original PlayStation, I don't remember this gentleman's name. I think it was David something, like David Hex or David something, and then some numbers. This gentleman was on Twitter, and he took a CD burner, like a DVD burner, and he was able to hack up the firmware on there where he was able to burn PS1 games, which doesn't sound very novel on its own, but he was able to burn the wobble groove in there.
What?
And that is, yeah, and that is one
Wow.
of the most impressive things I've seen in so long. So for anybody who's wondering why that's so impressive, that is literally, you can take a PS1 ISO, you can use it if you're using, this hacked up drive, you can burn the disk and you can just plop it into a PS1 and it's going to work. Like
A
that's
stock
impressive to
console,
me.
stock PS1.
Completely stock console, no swap methods, no swap tricks, no spring, no blocking sensors, no mod chip, nothing on there.
So it's getting the
That
Dreamcast treatment.
yeah, in short. So that's been something cool I've seen. I don't think I don't think it's gonna be like ready for production or anything. I think it's more just something he was looking into, because he essentially said you have to have specific drives, you have to hack the firmware in a specific way. Also, it was very rudimentary when he was doing it. He was able to successfully do it, but man, it was really tough on the laser, both the burning and the reading process. But that was one of the most impressive things there that I haven't seen a release on. And then, of course, like I guess I'm a little biased here because I'm friends with Harcroft, but he's kept me up to date on some of his projects and such that are making things easier. So like the open source Xbox HDMI implementation, that looks fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing that. I know I have one or two systems I need to try this on, but even again on the original Xbox, the dreaded issue where the power and eject buttons aren't working properly, so you need to scratch some of the traces and rewire them and all that. I know he's worked on some printed circuit boards and some flex cables for those. I got really excited when I saw those, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. So I think some little projects like that there.
So just speaking of stuff that's coming out in the near future, um, I was wondering if we could chat about the 360 exploit that was teased recently by
Oh yeah,
Grimburner. Is
yeah.
that is a very, like, that's something we haven't seen. We haven't seen a soft mod since what, um the King Kong exploit? Wasn't that the last time that
Yeah,
we've seen
and
something like this happen? That was what,
I
2006 or something?
I will stop you right there. Let's not get people too excited. It's not going to be a soft mod, or it might not.
Right, right.
As he said, as Grim Doomer said, it's not going to be the soft mod that the community is looking for, because we don't know. Like what we know so far is, and I guess for anybody, well, actually, Scotch, do you want to talk more about like intro it, or do you mind if I take it?
I mean, I've only read and heard what you've probably read and heard. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead and take it. Go ahead and let people know what we're talking about here.
Sure. So to kind of sum it up on the 360, and this is I don't know anything more than anyone else out there. Like everything I know is public about it, but essentially, Grim Doomer was able to take Tony Hawk's American Wasteland, and originally I think he had this on like the 4548 dashboard, which is the same one as the King Kong exploit, which you all can look into, and he was able to get unsigned code running at a software-only level. You have a stock Xbox 360, you put a file on a hard drive with a hacked up save file, you load that in, boom, you're able to run unsigned code. It's not JTAG, it's not a dev kit, no flash DVD drive, none of that stuff. So he had said he wasn't going to work on it any further, but it was such a limited implementation just because you had to be on such a old dashboard. But he came out and surprised everyone, saying that on the latest dashboard and kernel for the Xbox 360, he was able to find a hypervisor exploit. And he showed a video of it where essentially there's a few race conditions, like very specific race conditions it has to accomplish. It doesn't have the best success rate, maybe 40 or 50%, and it takes like 20 minutes to launch. But
it might
same
not
thing.
even launch. It might not even work. It might take a couple tries too.
Exactly. So it's I'm just thinking like the nightmares of like RGH2 wiring and timing and such. But no, when it comes to it, really on the latest dashboard, like you can theoretically you can grab an Xbox 360, update it to the latest kernel, and then once you have this here, you have your hacked up game save, you have the files that are needed on a USB drive or on the internal drive or whatever, completely stock system, sealed up, no modifications done. You pop in your copy of American Wasteland, you end up booting this up. If it's successful, you wait about 20 minutes or so, and then boom, you're able to launch into unsigned code. He had done a little bit of like what was it? It was like Bad Apple with Neon Cat type homebrew.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're not gonna see like Rocky 5 boot up or anything. But it's exciting because I really never thought we would see a new hypervisor exploit, because the hypervisor exploit, the hypervisor itself on the 360, like it's impressive. It's strong. It's taken this long to have a professional take a proper crack at it, almost 20 years. So it's definitely exciting to see. Is it going to turn into a soft mod? We don't know. We just don't know at this point. Even Grim Doomer has said it's been like very limited with what he's able to do, but he's at least able to show that he's able to break the hypervisor enough that he's able to run unsigned code on the system, which is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen on the 360. I will say though, if you're kind of just waiting on this for a while, it might be a little bit of a controversial opinion, and it's how do I put it? I would love to be proven wrong on this, but I kind of have a belief it's not really worth waiting for a soft mod on the 360, because the hard mods that are out there, either if you can do them or if you can have someone else do them, they're pretty set in stone, they're pretty great, they're pretty solid, and I feel like they're probably going to be better than even if we do get a soft mod implementation, if we have to wait 3 months or a year or 5 years, the hard mods are still probably going to succeed that. So I kind of want to dispel that, because people think that soft mod is better just because it's easier and it doesn't require soldering, which that's not necessarily the case for most systems. Some of them, but most of them, that's not the case. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're gonna wait until next year because he plans to disclose it around February 2025, maybe around then, something like that. And then I guess we'll kind of just see where the community takes it on there. But I will say, if it kind of sticks to this, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if he brings, the time down on there. But if it's a thing where to launch into a modified environment, you have to run this exploit every single time, I know a lot of people are not going to want to do that, because a lot of people are not going to want to wait 10 or 20 minutes every single time in order to do this.
Right. Right now, it's basically just a proof of concept. It's saying that this, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is sort of a method that can be done here. And I'm very much looking forward to reading through his explanation. I don't know if you guys have read through his the Halo 2 HD write-up that he did, as well as the Tony
Yeah.
Hawk, which we haven't even mentioned that yet. But the same person, Grim Doomer, also released a series of exploits for many different consoles, including the original Xbox and now kind of the 360. But he found an exploit in many different versions of different Tony Hawk games that, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, it sort of exploits how when the console goes to load a custom skate park, you can name your gaps in Tony Hawk, right? You jump across from one gap to another. And he found out that uses an unsafe string copying function in C. So it basically, he, overflows that buffer and then has, what's the term, a ROP chain, right? And I'm sure it's going to be a feat of engineering once we actually see how this thing works, because his last write-ups were very in-depth, very detailed, and he also was kind enough to publish videos and stuff. But yeah, it's very cool to see, kind of like the original Xbox, 20 years later almost, because 360 came out in 2006, right? So 20 years,
2005.
thank you. Yeah, so 20 years later, we're seeing new developments, and I don't know. You're right that the hardware, the hard mods, are still an option, and they're very well polished at this point. Like, they're very easy, but it's just cool to see stuff still happening. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens with that.
For sure. I will say kind of the last bit on kind of like the hard mod versus soft mod type thing. I kind of even said the part of like it's not really worth waiting for one. If we get one, fantastic, that's awesome. But I mean, I've seen people say they've been waiting for a soft mod for the last 10, almost 15 years on the 360, and it's like, dude, I'm just thinking of like all the fun I've had with like my hard modded systems and just kind of like deleting that from the past 10 or 15 years because I want to be stubborn. I'm like, that itself is kind of a waste of time in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds like, and I know he's gotten some pushback over this, and I kind of wanted to hear your opinion on it. He's gotten some pushback because he has chosen to disclose it to Microsoft before he releases it publicly. And I have some opinions on that, but I'm curious what your thoughts are as far as.
I think the pushback is dumb in my opinion. I think he's doing the right thing on there because he was on good terms with Microsoft and he wants to do the responsible thing on it. It really hasn't stopped anything else. Like we've seen with the Switch is completely cracked wide open for how long, and that was disclosed there. We've seen Sony's bug bounty program, which has been great. We've still gotten many. How do I put it? We've still gotten many. Exploits and jailbreaks out of it. And I'll even say as well too, please look at the Sony scene when it comes to it, because there's been people like The Flow who have been willing to help more, but then when there's community pushback pushing against The Flow and saying, hey, you're doing the wrong thing disclosing this to Sony here, he is a lot less willing to help. So he can say, y'all are just not going to get anything. I'm just going to take my money and run off there. Really, the biggest thing with these companies are that if it is a system that they still want to support, or even if it's an unsupported type system as well too, if it is going to be online in some way, I think I can understand, I can understand the risks and the assessments and everything of wanting to disclose that properly there. And I think that should be done in that regard. Because in short, these companies don't want to have these exploits running on the latest and greatest and going online and such. Especially you look at PS4, PS5, that's been the biggest thing. Sony, for the most part, if it's on an outdated firmware, you can't go online with an outdated firmware. They don't care if it's on a firmware from a year or two ago. That's fine, because more people would rather go online with a stock system than stay offline with a jailbroken system. The 360,
Exactly.
we're going to see if they're going to publish a new dashboard, if they're going to fix this up. And if they do, whatever, there's how many tens of millions or even hundreds of actually no, it wasn't hundreds, but they sold tens of millions of the Xbox 360. There's how many exploitable systems out there in the wild on a low enough dashboard there. The dashboard that's running right now that's exploitable, I think was released in 2019, something like that. So unless you're going to be one of those people who you want to update immediately on there, and we do have those people, it's like, dude, that's your loss. Like if you update your system and you lose the ability to do it, buy a new system off of Marketplace or Craigslist or Kijiji or whatever you're going to do on there. I don't see anything wrong with what he's doing on this. I think it's the proper thing, and we've seen plenty of releases from him, so he's going to be a respectable homebrew dev in this regard too.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think he's doing the right thing, and I also agree that it's kind of dumb, to put it in your words. It's dumb that people have pushed back, and it's almost like a sense of tribalism, like, oh, you're with them, not with us. Like, no, I mean, you can have your cake and eat it too. Just don't
Exactly.
upgrade your console to the latest revision and you'll be fine. And that's
Yeah.
also that's something we talked about in one of our previous episodes. It's like, where do you toe the line between what's okay to hack versus not, and that sort of thing. And kind of a consensus that we arrived at was kind of like what you said. It's the console manufacturers and Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, they more so care about that experience of people being able to buy the system, play it online, and have that that ecosystem, that current meta, whatever it is. But yeah, some of these older consoles where they're kind of getting outdated, it's cool to see people kind of picking up the torch, whether it be the original Xbox or the 360, and keeping it
Oh,
useful.
I agree. I agree. And even again, I'm kind of, it's kind of easy to harken back to the Sony side on there, but like the latest firmware for like the Vita and the PS3, which are still online running compatible, they have their marketplaces and all that up. Although in a little more limited capacity, just because of, issues with older legacy systems and modern payment methods and security and such. I can understand that there. You can get a PS3 or a Vita and update it to the latest firmware and hack it up. Sony's been aware of these. I think even these have been disclosed to Sony, or if not, they're open source, or they know how to reverse it. And like they just don't care. Like they're aware of it and they don't care for the most part because it's an old system. They're going to focus on the PS4 and the PS5 in that regard. So it is, as you say, it's possible to have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, and I mean, at a certain point, from a business standpoint, I can imagine that it just doesn't make sense to pay the software engineer and the technical people and the teams and the revisions and the testing to go through all the effort for what, for an outdated console.
Yeah,
I mean, by all means, it's their right to do if they want to, but I can understand why they wouldn't. It's not, not necessarily because they are enthusiastic about modders, but rather it's just kind of irrelevant to them.
Yeah, like 360, even with that, like bringing it back home here, it's stealth servers have been online for how long? They've been on and if they want to, they could sniff these out. They could shut down stealth servers. They can, ban every single person who's running on a stealth server. It could be, but to their own determination, like Microsoft's determination, they've probably looked at it. They are completely aware of this. They're not going to be dumb about it, but they've looked at it and they've determined that it's not worth going after with this. I will say though, bans are still happening on the Xbox 360. Like if you're going online, you're modding and such. And I'll say this, the people who have hard modded systems, who use stealth servers, who they say, oh, I'm fine, I don't get banned or anything. That's because like the anti-ban protections are really good on those stealth servers. So I am going to caution everyone with this here. If there's going to be a fully blown soft mod in the future for the 360 where you can just, do this on a retail system, and you're able to, connect online, do what you need to on there, those same protections are probably not going to be equivalent and probably not going to be put in place. So do not do the stupid thing of just taking your retail system with a soft mod directly online and modding about and then getting banned within 12 hours and complaining about it. That should just that should just be a default thing.
That should go without saying, but it's worth saying anyways. Yeah.
I'm kind of from the old school as well too, where you have two systems. You keep one offline for modding, you keep one online for stock and up to date.
Yep, absolutely.
Actually, I've got a question for Mario. It doesn't have to go on a podcast, but out of all the consoles that you've modded, right? If you could only keep one and only play that one, which one would you choose?
360.
360?
Yeah, pretty quick with I think that's because I delved so big into modding with that, and also it really like boosted my YouTube and such, which I mean it's a chunk of my life that's important to me. So I think it's definitely that. Plus some of the impressive things on there. I know it's funny because I actually kind of want to talk about this a little bit here. I thought this like 5 minutes ago. But I kind of just need to like chronicle it or something. But even though like we didn't see homebrew and development and such really get off the ground as much as we would have liked to compared to the original Xbox. The game library is great. I had a lot of great history and experiences with that. Very much like a time in my life that I appreciated as well too. So it was exciting seeing the developments and like new games come out and such there. So like some of my favorite titles are on there. Plus, even though the emulator is not going to be the best, it is pretty impressive. Like you can play many original Xbox titles on there. But it's just, to me, I was really following like DVD drive flashing really closely because for whatever reason that was just so interesting to me. And I will say even the work that C Forever did is like with the iExtreme and Light Touch firmwares, it's still one of the most impressive modifications to me because there was such a big cat and mouse game to the point where you got to remember, I mean, there was like anti-piracy 2.5, there was the challenge tables, there was like challenge and response tables, and there was ways of like patching those into the discs themselves whenever you'd burn them, and you'd have to like reburn them every update. But then they were static per update. But the biggest thing was, if you all remember, the silent update, where it was just one day, if you connected your console to Xbox Live, didn't have to take an update or anything on it, it would update the day.bin on your system, and every single one was randomized. So the newer titles no longer worked from burned discs at that point. And then that's where we got Light Touch 3, where he said he pretty much had it in his back pocket, and he essentially had he was baking in response challenges for every single possible challenge into the disc across every single console that it would have. And that's one of the most impressive things to me, to the point where like that was kind of the final push that they had there. Not only they did that silent update, but even to this day, it is, I think that rolled out in 2011. I want to say like at the end of 2011. And to this day, it is still up and running and working properly.
Oh, good on them.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
what they had managed to achieve back in the day was incredible. Is there anything that I guess you'd like to see come to the 360, whether it's emulation, whether it's hardware, whether it's an application?
Hmm. I think it would be cool with, in terms of games themselves, one thing I've been seeing a lot of requests for in the last few years is people saying, "Oh, we need an optical drive emulator for the 360." And it's kind of funny because you can kind of reply and be like, "Well, actually, they existed, like they did, and there was 3 or 4 of them back in the day."
Yeah.
But now it's so hard to find those. So I think it'd be really cool to have a open source implementation of that, because if you want to just play a game directly off the hard drive or off external storage without having a disk in the drive, that's only really going to be possible with digital titles or on a hard modded 360. But in terms of like a retail one, now in the last few years, where we see ODEs for pretty much all the legacy systems, we're seeing them much easier accessible for the Saturn, the Sega CD, any of these other systems, the Dreamcast, of course. Now people are kind of going back to revisit the 360, and they're wanting that. And of course, those disk drives are dying. So I think having a cool, like either reverse engineered or open source re-implementation or just a net new product would be really cool to have that. But in terms of actual software on there, we've been seeing a lot of stuff with like hitting the upper limitations on there. I know like Eaton has done really good work with getting up to 16 terabyte drives internally and externally working on that. But it would just be nice to have more just general application homebrew support, because it seems like we had that on the Xbox and we're still getting updates on there. And then there's people who, I have friends, they reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, I've had this modded 360 for a while. What like cool homebrew is there? Because I can play my games, but what else is there?" And I'm like, that's kind of it, man. So it's a double-edged sword, because the library on the 360 I absolutely love. So that's also what holds it up so well. But at the same time, we just don't get that support, like the raw homebrew support that we had on the original system, which I know that also frustrated like many developers back in the day as well too. So those are kind of my wishes for like hardware and software.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with the OG Xbox was more of a x86 base, and then you
Yeah.
had the 360 came in with the Power PC infrastructure. So it was a bit of a learning curve for a lot of developers to sort of jump across. But yeah, definitely, me personally, I'd like to see a bit more emulation on that, especially since it's a powerful system.
Mhm.
But then the fact that you mentioned IDEs, I'm guessing something similar to like an open source XKey. Is that
Yeah.
the kind of path you're looking
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
or?
Yeah, that would be cool. That just having something like that. I know there was some like it was a few years ago. There were some people who were reverse engineering the X key, and they were able to like rip apart the firmware and pull out like a bunch of keys and stuff. But I never really saw anything come from it out of that. So that's why, unfortunately, I never reported on it because I'm like, okay, we got the keys, we're pulling apart the firmware. We already have the manuals, the firmware files, and all that and guides on how to install it. But like, is there something that's going to come that's substantial from this? Unfortunately, I don't possess that skill set, and that's just like not necessarily how my brain works. So I'm not going to be the one who can be tasked with that. But we kind of just have to see. I feel like we kind of just need like one person who will like come into the fray and look at it and be like, oh, I have this like really specialized knowledge that I got from like working professionally on things similar to this, and this doesn't seem all too hard, and like the groundwork is here. Let me just go ahead and do it. I think we're kind of waiting on someone like that.
Yeah.
There are developers today picking up 360. Like I know Crunchbite was talking about doing XCAT 360, but that's probably a gateway for him to get into more, other homebrew stuff. But for 360, I don't even think necessarily the modding scene was the only like amazing advancement about it. Like they turned the proof of concept Xbox Live into a full feature, like a massive gaming experience for for millions of gamers. They took the concept of this gimmicky Xbox Live Arcade disc for original Xbox and turned it into this like 10,000 game library with indie like homebrew games. It just you could pay $100 for the year and have your game published on Xbox Live. Like it was a lot more innovation on 360, I think, than we've seen with any console ever otherwise.
And I think that also leads to the reason why the 360 and the One haven't been sort of hacked quite as much. Obviously, the security is a huge obstacle. I don't mean to undermine that, but Microsoft welcoming indie developers was an awesome thing to see on the 360, like you said, and also on the One. It's never been like you don't need a couple $1,000 dev kit and a license agreement. You don't need all that. You just need for the Xbox One. It's what you pay $20 for a developer license, and then you can go crazy. I think it's really cool to see console manufacturers embracing that.
I know it's to an extent. I do know there's still limitations on there. Like I think there's some, and they have raised them a few years ago. There's still going to be some limitations, but I mean, if you're just learning like game dev and you want to like quickly build something in Unity and push it to your Xbox One or Series, like that's certainly possible to do for only $20, and that's really awesome right there.
Right. And it might be saving their butts because they're kind of appeasing some hackers who, you tell someone you can't run Linux on something, and that's good incentive for them to figure out how to run Linux on it,
Of course.
We look at PS3 hacking, how it basically there was nothing until Sony removed the backwards or whatever the Linux feature.
The other OS.
Other OS, that's it.
Yeah, and I've looked some of the PS3 archives, and I mean there was some stuff that was happening around like maybe like firmware like 3.21 and some other things, but it was so rudimentary compared to what happened like then, because then you had a lot more renewed interest in it around like that 3.55 time, and that's when you got like really good developers on there and much more like modern solutions that we still see to this day. So, and it was just from them removing that feature.
Yep, they learned not to piss off the hackers.
Oh yeah, yes they did. And that's why I do applaud them for doing the whole HackerOne like bug bounty on there. So we're still able to kind of have both sides of it. As long as you have either an unsupported system or an out of date firmware system, you can still have your fun.
I just think it's remarkable that like the first time I was able to load up Kodi on my retail stock Xbox, I was like, dude. Back in the day, we would have had to jump through so many hoops to have XBMC, which is now Kodi, right? Like, but you could just go onto the marketplace and download it. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think that was one of the beautiful moments I saw when like modding and like stock stuff came together, where we had this thing called XBMC, Xbox Media Center, and then it gets ported to everything under the sun. And then it gets renamed to Kodi, so it's a little nicer to see because the XBMC moniker doesn't matter anymore, or just doesn't make sense. And then it got officially published onto the Xbox One, so that was a really nice full circle thing.
Yeah, it definitely came full circle.
Yeah, I did want to ask you all this real quick because this was one thing I remember this moment. So funny, like I said, when I was younger, at one point for a few years, I didn't have internet access, but I was shocked to see this, and I ended up tracking it down later, several years ago. Does anybody here, has anybody heard of or read or own this book? I think it's called like The Black Art of Xbox Mods. It's something like that. And I remember as a kid, I found it. I don't even know how, but I found it in a Hastings. I didn't buy it, but I read it right there. And it talked about like ripping open the system and modding and everything. And I remember I was just mind blown because I was surprised that I was holding that in a physical book and like that knowledge was being published and sold.
Are you referring to Bunny's book?
No. That it is easy to mix up though. I need to find this real quick, but let me see. Found it. All right, I'm gonna link it. I suppose I can just drop it in like this chat here.
Yeah,
Here we
the
go.
text chat for here should be fine.
Is that the
Yeah.
one from Jonathan Harbour? I think
Yes,
it
it
had
is.
a purple background with an Xbox or something.
You know it. Yes.
Yeah. That's old school.
I can verify 100% that was sold in stores. That's how I knew about that, and that always blew my mind.
Wow.
It's a great book too. It is outdated, mind you, compared to everything that's happened here. But like there was one day I sat down and read it, and oh my god, that was some of the most fun I had with a book.
Now to find a print copy in Canada.
Oh, only $13 on Amazon, not bad.
Yeah, and it's not bank breaking either. But this is like one of those books. I'm like, I thought I had to track it down years later because I'm like, is this a fever dream? Is this something I imagined? And like, I couldn't even get the name of it right. And then at one point, it was like after a year or two of looking for it, it kind of just clicked, and I looked it up, found it. It was something like $13 on Amazon. I immediately bought it.
Almost like wandering into a cave and discovering a dark, tome script.
That's kind of how it felt, man.
Well, thank you so much, Mario, and to Prehistoricman for joining us on this episode. It's been great having you guys on and picking your brains and hearing your insights. So, Mario, if people are interested in your videos, how can they follow you? Where can they find you?
First of all, thank you for bringing me on. I really appreciate it. I know Scotch has been trying to bring me on ever since the first episode here, like I said, and just timing hasn't matched up here, but I promise I wanted to be on. Here I am, and this was a fun episode overall. So I look forward to hearing more and maybe on another one in the future. We'll see how it goes. But if people want to find me, I'm pretty much Mr. Mario 2011 everywhere. My main upload place is YouTube. And then if you want to see other places, I know I mayor on Odyssey and Rumble, and in terms of like actual like tech stuff as well, I guess Twitter/Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky more, and on there I'm MrMario2011.com. So if you want to reach out there, feel free.
That's great. Yeah, definitely go check out his channel if you haven't yet, guys. There's a wealth of information there, like I've been saying. What about you, Prehistoricman? How can people keep up with what you're working on these days?
Yeah, I'm Prehistoricman pretty much everywhere. So I'm on Twitter. Haven't posted anything yet, but I'm thinking I can put some little micro updates there. The main protocol is the YouTube channel and forums.
Yeah, and we'll also include links to these guys' profiles in the description on this video too. And with that, we're going to end this. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.